While some ancient societies, like the Indus Valley Civilization, are only known to us from archaeological finds because they left no written records, and later eras knew nothing about them, others, like early Rome, are described in the works of later writers, but they tend to straddle a line between history and myth. This is the case for the earliest era of Chinese history, which is described in the Book of Documents, a collection of speeches attributed to early kings that was first composed around the 6th century BCE, the time of Confucius, or possibly a bit later. It is also mentioned in the Bamboo Annals, a chronicle written in the 3rd century BCE, and in the Records of the Grand Historian, which was the first history of the preceding Chinese dynasties in the 2nd century. These books open with a legendary age when China was ruled by a series of 3 sovereigns, who were both kings and gods, followed by 5 emperors who lived a supernaturally long time. These rulers taught the people, who lived in an idyllic world without war or conflict, the rudiments of human society, such as farming and how to build houses, which is a picture of the distant past that is very reminiscent of both the golden age of Greek myth and the stories of the Book of Genesis. This period was followed by a dynasty called the Xia, which our sources claim was established around 2200 BCE, a time before writing had appeared in China, by the legendary Yu the Great, who was the first king to control the flooding of the Yellow River and to establish a dynasty by appointing his son to rule after him. Yu's line was believed to have ended with the founding of the Shang Dynasty in the 17th century BCE. According to modern historians, however, the fact that ancient descriptions of the Xia and the Shang are so similar suggests that the Xia was a later invention, which may have been created during the later Zhou period to justify the Zhou overthrow of the Shang as a reenactment of what the Shang had already done to the Xia. On the other hand, there have been archaeological finds from what is called the Arlito culture in the Yellow River Valley, which date from around the same period as the Xia, and were found in the same places that were later associated with it. The Shang dynasty was believed to have arisen in northeastern China around 1600 BCE, when a king named Tang, a member of a family that had ruled Shang for 13 generations, rebelled against the last Xia emperor, whose vassal he was, because he was convinced that he had lost the mandate of heaven, the authority granted by the gods to rule over China. Unlike the Xia, who were tyrants, the Shang kings acted in the people's interest by reducing taxes, limiting army service, and giving money to the poor so that they could buy back the children they had been forced to sell in order to survive. These kings were supported by a network of local governors, a class of scribes, and an aristocracy of nobles, and the members of their own family were given important responsibilities. The king's officials were in charge of things like agriculture and hunting, which was an aristocratic pastime, and their offices may have been hereditary, as they would be in later dynasties. The nobles, who were largely independent of the king in their regular affairs, were given their own fiefdoms where they could set their own policies so long as they contributed grain to the royal court. They also had to organize and equip the peasants in their area in time of war. Shang warfare was conducted with bronze spears and axes, bows, and horse-drawn chariots. It is believed that the chariot was a Central Asian innovation that arrived in China around 1200 BCE, and that the Shang used them mainly for hunting and transportation during battles, rather than as strategic vehicles. Shang monarchs ruled their territory from a series of capitals, the last of which, near the modern city of Anyang, has yielded a number of palaces and tombs, as well as many weapons and works of art. The king was in charge of conducting wars, and we know about frequent conflicts with other states, and with the nomadic tribes at the kingdom's borders, from the oracle bones produced at the time. These were a form of divination specific to the Shang monarchy, in which the shoulder bones of cattle or the shells of turtles were inscribed with questions about the future, the following year's harvest, the outcome of a military campaign, or the well-being of the royal family, and then subjected to heat so that the resulting cracks could be interpreted. In the course of setting out the king's questions, these texts include a lot of background information. The oracle bones of King Wu Ding, for example, mention his many victories and the decapitation of thousands of war captives as sacrifices in the cult of ancestor worship. The king himself was largely in charge of this cult, which may have been his primary function, and he was responsible for consulting the spirit world when questions like the success of an upcoming harvest needed to be asked. The Shang Dynasty was a period of economic stability when many large, walled cities were built of wood on platforms of compacted earth. The majority of common people were farmers, who lived on the land beyond the cities. They might be free owners of their farms, or bound like medieval serfs to the land of wealthier men, and large irrigation systems were built during this period to improve agricultural output. There was also a higher class of craftspeople whose workshops, along with temples, were located in the centers of cities, which were walled off from their outer edges. The art of carving vases of jade and bone developed, and jade was used to make ceremonial weapons and figurines. Bronze casting developed to the point that it produced beautiful decorative objects, though it was also used for weapons. But unlike the Egyptian and Mediterranean civilizations of this period, the Shang, who were geographically isolated, did not trade their fine handicrafts over long distances by either land or sea. There were two important technical developments during the Shang period. The first of these was the wan-nien-li, named after its creator, Wan-nien, which was a combined lunar-solar calendar that marked the seasons of the solar year, which were needed to plan agricultural activities, while using months that were based on the lunar cycle from one new moon to the next. Because 12 lunar months equal around 354 days rather than the 365 and a quarter of the solar year, an additional month was inserted every 2 to 3 years, which, as in the similar Jewish calendar, kept the lunar and solar cycles more or less in sync with one another. The second development was the invention of writing. An early form of the Chinese script was used for oracle bones. These inscriptions make use of several thousand characters, which, as in classical Chinese, represent entire words and ideas rather than syllables or letters. And though many of these characters are unlike the ones found in later Chinese, the script is similar enough to the mature form of the language that it seems to have been developing for centuries by the time the oracle bones appeared in the 13th century. Along with the inscriptions written on bronze objects like cauldrons and bells, they are our earliest Chinese texts. The development of writing enabled subsequent advances in mathematics and astronomy, as records of celestial phenomena began to be made, and the classics of Chinese literature, many of them traditionally associated with Confucius, were composed during the Zhou period that followed the Shang. One of the more important Shang kings was Wu Ding, who ruled in the second half of the 13th century. He is one of the few monarchs of this time whose career is corroborated by archaeological evidence. In this case, the tomb of one of his wives, named Fu Hao, which was discovered in 1976. The many oracle bones and weapons found in this tomb tell us that Lady Fu was both a priestess and a military commander, known for her successful battles. Many of the innovations of the Shang period are associated specifically with Wu Ding's reign. The last Shang ruler was overthrown in a battle in 1046 BCE by Wu from the western Zhou province, after which the next dynasty is named. The Shang king's son was allowed by Wu to continue to rule his kingdom as a vassal of the new Zhou state, but after Wu died, he joined a rebellion of 3 members of the Zhou royal family who were unhappy with the power that the emperor's brother, the Duke of Zhou, had acquired as the regent of Wu's young son. This rebellion resulted in the Shang king's defeat and the incorporation of his territory into the Zhou state. The leaders of the rebellion were forcibly resettled in other parts of the Zhou Empire, but many members of the Shang family who remained a part of the aristocracy went on to play an important part in Zhou administration. Though the Zhou Empire was much larger than the Shang had been, it was organized as a confederation of states that were in many ways independent, and the relations between these states, their power over one another, and their willingness to acknowledge the king's authority were the backdrop against which the next 800 years of Chinese history took place.
Thanks for watching. Subscribe to my channel for more tutorials. Support me on Patreon so I can keep making content. And as always, feel free to email me, ProfessorDaveExplains@gmail.com.